When two Kansas teens fell head over heels, they thought their love story was only just beginning. But one spring night, it was cruelly cut short, and the person responsible has never been brought to justice. This is the Case Remains podcast, episode 21, The Unsolved Murder of Nick Travis and Tabitha Brewer. All it takes is one moment to change your life forever. For 14 years, Tabitha Brewer was much like any other kid growing up in Kansas, making friends, going to school, and daydreaming about what the future might hold. And then there was the accident, and suddenly everything was different. Tabitha had been attending Shawnee Mission South High School when she got into a car accident in her freshman year, thrown from the car with such force that she landed on the other side of the road. The accident almost killed Tabitha, leaving her with fractures in her skull and left wrist and scarring her for life. She fell behind on her classes as a result of her injuries and decided to transfer to an alternative high school so she could catch up. Starting a new school can be a nerve-wracking time, but for Tabitha, there was a friendly face in the crowd. She'd be joining her boyfriend, Nick Travis, at school. By 1998, Tabitha and Nick had been together for over a year and lived together along with Tabitha's dad and stepmom in a cramped apartment in Olathe. While many teen relationships are dismissed as puppy love, Nick and Tabitha's relationship made adults take notice. They were supportive and encouraged one another, and friends and family thought they were made for each other. According to the assistant principal at their school, they were better together than they ever were apart. Nick and Tabitha were both making good grades and seemed to be enjoying their classes, but for whatever reason they decided to leave so that they could both enter the world of work. Nick took a job at a sandwich shop, while Tabitha worked as a secretary at a mortgage company alongside her stepmother, Donna. Though they were young, they had planned a life together. They had talked about getting married, buying a house one day, and had even picked out a name for their future baby, a little girl they planned to call Destiny. Prior to moving in with Tabitha's dad, the couple had lived with her mother, Brenda. Brenda liked Nick, who had earned his keep while under her roof, painting walls and helping to build a water garden. For Christmas, he had even got her a bottle of perfume. Like Tabitha, he was kind to a fault, but tragically, it may have been that very kindness that played a part in the events to follow. On the 27th of April, 1998, Tabitha and Nick were at their apartment when Nick said he had plans to run an errand that evening. Having attended the same school, with the same circle of friends and living in the same home, it wasn't often that Tabitha and Nick spent time apart. Tabitha was annoyed that he was going to go out without her, and convinced a reluctant Nick to let her tag along. A friend from their high school, Chad Haviland, paged Nick to ask if he could come over. Nick said that he could come by, but let him know that they were getting ready to leave. Chad dropped by in his van and talked to Nick and another friend. Nick didn't tell the boys what errand he was going to run, but implied that it would only take a couple of hours. He told them that he was going to be picked up by another of their classmates, an 18-year-old boy named Brandon Howell, who turned up just a few minutes later. Nick went inside to fetch Tabitha, and just before midnight the three drove off. It was the last time that anyone saw Tabitha or Nick alive. When the young couple didn't return home, police had to consider the possibility that Tabitha and Nick had left of their own accord, maybe even run away to get married. But neither of them had used their bank accounts or contacted friends or family since the night of the 27th. They didn't appear to have taken anything from home with them when they left, nor did they leave any note behind. Nick's car was still parked in the drive, in perfect working order, and filled with half a tank of gas. Tabitha and Nick's families sprang into action, printing off missing persons posters and putting them up around the neighbourhood. 2 people who'd seen the flyers of the missing teenagers called to say that they'd spotted them in Johnson County, but the sightings couldn't be verified. At first, it seemed as though police didn't really have much to work with. It was a few days later, on April 30th, when a witness saw a man throwing something into the trash behind a laundrette. They called the owner, Charles Carr, who checked the bin to find a charred, gasoline-soaked purse, Tabitha's purse. Inside were the couple's IDs, Nick's checkbook, photos of Tabitha's nieces and nephews, and some of her jewellery. For Tabitha's family, the discovery was a devastating one. As her mother Brenda explained, "She had her jewellery on always. I can't think of any reason her jewellery would be in her purse, unless someone took her jewellery off so her body would be harder to identify." A week after Tabitha's purse was found, the Kansas City Star reported that police were struggling to find witnesses who'd seen the young couple on the night they disappeared. As the last person to have seen Tabitha and Nick, police naturally wanted to talk to Brandon Howell to find out his version of events. Howell said that he dropped the couple off at a nearby convenience store and hadn't heard from them again. Statements from friends of Tabitha and Nick showed that he had given conflicting statements as to where the young couple had gone. A search of his car in the days following the disappearance also revealed what looked like scuff marks from a shoe on the inside of the trunk of his car. When pressed by detectives, Howell said that he wouldn't answer any more questions without his lawyer present. But with no concrete evidence of a crime having taken place, and with Howell's lawyer out of town, the police had no choice but to wait. Meanwhile, they talked to everyone they could think of and reread their reports, hoping to uncover some clues. By that time, several more sightings had been called in, including one to Tabitha's family. The man, who didn't reveal his identity, said that the teenagers could be found in a field in Kansas City, hungry and dirty but alive, and warned them to send lots of police officers. Unfortunately, after several hours spent searching the area, it seemed as though the call was just a cruel joke. While Nick and Tabitha's families continued to search for their children, giving interviews, attending marches, handing out flyers and bumper stickers, the police investigation hit a dead end. But on August 14th, 1998, the case would take a tragic turn. Just 4 doors down from where Tabitha's purse was discovered, there was a duplex that had lay vacant for the last 5 years. The owner was in the process of selling it to Willa Bird, who had purchased the home for her and her mother to move into, and had begun to fix it up. She had been working on it for the past year, but had decided to speed up her efforts so that they could move in at the end of August of 1998. She had tasked a construction worker with pouring concrete along the back of the duplex so that water couldn't get in and flood the basement, and with building a patio over the top. The worker had dug about 6 inches into the ground when he made a strange discovery, a shoe concealed beneath the soil. When he pulled the shoe out, he realised to his horror that there was a human foot inside it. When the news broke, Tabitha's father and stepmother rushed to the scene, waiting nervously outside by the yellow crime scene tape to be told whose body had been found. They sat outside in their pickup truck all night and for most of the next day, with neighbours stopping by to bring food, drinks and some much-needed comfort while they waited for word from the officers inside. On Tuesday, the 18th of August, 4 days after the body was found, police announced that they had made an identification. The body belonged to Nick Travis. The discovery stirred up mixed emotions for Tabitha's family. Though it wasn't Tabitha's body buried in the ground, their hope of finding her alive was shaken. Her father Tom told the Kansas City Star, "Knowing Nick and knowing Tabitha and knowing how close they are, I feel that whatever happened to Nick happened to her." Police got to work searching the scene, digging the top 10 inches of soil from the yard and shoveling it into sifters to see if they could find any clues. They took sniffer dogs to the location where Nick's body was found, hoping they might turn up some fresh evidence, but the dogs came back with nothing. When the dig was complete, they searched the rest of the duplex, spraying luminol to search for any sign of blood, or any evidence to suggest that Nick may have been killed in the home. Testing later revealed that blood spatters and smears in the duplex matched Nick's DNA, while an autopsy revealed that he'd been killed by a blow to the head. The case was now officially a homicide investigation. They may not have found any physical evidence, but police did, however, find a link between the duplex and Brandon Howell. The contractor working on the home was a friend of the new owner, Willa Bird. That friend was Romez Howell, Brandon Howell's father. In May of 1997, long before Tabitha and Nick disappeared, Romez had requested a permit to work on the house, repairing a roof and raising the ceiling. Since then, Romez and various family members had worked on the house ready for Willa and her mother to move in. Brandon had worked on construction jobs with his father in the past, although it wasn't clear if he'd ever done so in the duplex. Willa said that it was possible he had worked there, although if he did, she hadn't seen him. By the 19th of August, police told the press that they had a very strong focus in the investigation into Nick Travis's death. They had contacted Howell's lawyers to get him to go to police headquarters that same day, but Howell never showed up. The following day, the police said that a motive had emerged, and they publicly announced that they were looking to speak to Brandon Howell. So why would Howell have wanted to kill Tabitha and Nick? Well, there was one reason that police could think of. Tabitha had recently received a payment of $40,000, settlement money following the car crash she was involved in when she was 14. But Tabitha couldn't even get hold of the cash. It was held in a trust fund that she wasn't able to access. With his name now in the public domain, Howell turned himself into police on the 20th of August for an unrelated charge of underage drinking, and was held in county jail under a $25,000 bond. While he was there, however, Jackson County officials in Missouri also charged Howell with second-degree assault and unlawful use of a weapon. The charges stemmed from an incident back in March of that year, when he had beaten a 17-year-old boy with a baseball bat over an alleged debt of $1,300. After breaking the boy's wrist, Howell then shot a gun at him, which fortunately missed its target. These charges carried a separate bond of $100,000. Howell was eventually prosecuted for those crimes, but was spared prison because he committed them while under the age of 18, spending time in the state's youth center instead. Police may have found Howell, but when it came to Nick and Tabitha, they didn't get the answers they were looking for. It didn't take long for Howell to find himself in trouble with the law again. It was just 1 year later when he was arrested for his part in a home invasion in Johnson County. During the incident, Howell and two friends had forced their way into an apartment armed with a shotgun and a handgun. Once inside, they cut the telephone lines and demanded drugs and money from the two occupants, even cutting one of their hands with a butcher knife. The victims eventually managed to escape, but when one made it back to their ransacked home, she found her pet cat's decapitated head in the backyard, its body inside, hanging from a light fixture. After pleading guilty to a range of charges stemming from the incident, including aggravated robbery, assault, kidnapping, and cruelty to animals, Howell was sentenced to 12 years in prison in September of 2000. While there, he was far from a model inmate. According to prison records, while incarcerated, he notched up 20 disciplinary records, including fighting, battery, possession of dangerous contraband, and disobeying orders. While Howell was safely off the streets, progress was being made in the case of Nick Travis and Tabitha Brewer. The same year that he was sent to prison, the investigation was passed to a cold case team, where Detective Everett Babcock was leading the case. The team set to work, re-interviewing the hundreds of witnesses and numerous leads that had first appeared 8 years ago. It was during this investigation that several new witnesses came out of the woodwork, and the stories they told were shocking. One person alleged that they had heard Tabitha's voice coming from inside the duplex, followed by the sounds of male and female screaming. Howell later came out with blood on his shirt. Not only that, but they alleged that Howell had confessed to murdering Nick and that he had, as he put it, taken care of Tabitha. Another person police spoke to was an associate of Howell's. This associate alleged that Howell had mentioned on numerous occasions that he wanted to rob Nick and tried to talk him into helping with his plan. Together, they would rob and kill both Nick and Tabitha before cutting up their bodies in a bathtub, putting them in suitcases weighed down with rocks and throwing them into the river. Another informant told of Howell's scheme to lure a guy and a girl with a big bank account to a hotel, where he planned on holding one of them hostage and forcing the other to withdraw money from the bank. Then he was going to kill them in a bathtub. Another witness, a woman, also came forward, saying that Howell had once threatened her with a shotgun, saying, "I'll do you like I did Tabby." It seemed as though the passage of time had made it easier for people to talk. At the time of Nick and Tabitha's disappearance, these same witnesses had been teenagers themselves, reluctant to give up information and wary of the police. Now older, wiser, and with Howell safely behind bars, they were more forthcoming about what they knew. The cold case team combined their findings with the evidence from the initial investigation, presenting a 900-page case file to county prosecutors. Finally, 8 years after Tabitha and Nick disappeared, Brandon Howell was charged with their murders. The trial began in 2009, where prosecutors showed the jury a video presentation that linked Howell to the case and called numerous witnesses to the stand, including jailhouse informants, to back up their claims. Unfortunately, despite the police and legal team's best efforts, the evidence presented was merely circumstantial. In Tabitha's case, they still didn't even have a body. In the closing arguments, Howell's lawyer told jurors that his client was an innocent man who'd been targeted and pursued by the victims' families since the day they disappeared. The informants, he said, were there not for justice, but to escape their own legal problems at the expense of Brandon Howell. On Monday, the 9th of March, 2009, after 5 hours of jury deliberations, Howell was found not guilty of the murders of Tabitha Brewer and Nick Travis. As the verdict was read out in court, several family members left the courtroom sobbing. After the trial, Howell returned to prison to finish up the rest of his 12-year sentence. He managed to stay out of trouble after that, picking up only one additional disciplinary infraction. Howell was placed on work release and was finally paroled in February of 2011. And for a while at least, he appeared to be getting his life back on track. He got a job working 6 days a week, picking up and delivering donations, but had to stop when he wrecked his car a couple of years later. A warrant for his arrest was issued when he failed to report the accident, and Howell spent one night in jail. But that incident aside, he didn't get into any legal trouble, and was even released from parole 2 years after he left prison. While his father was trying to help him get a new car, Howell took on work at a construction site. But after sustaining an injury in August of 2014, he was laid off from the job. Just 1 month later, Howell would commit his most disturbing crime yet. It was September 2nd, a Tuesday afternoon. Kansas City Police Department's emergency dispatch received a call from a normally quiet, close-knit cul-de-sac. The small voice on the other end of the line belonged to 86-year-old Anna Taylor. "Help," she said. "Shotgun." Police raced to the neighbourhood of Woodbridge, where they quickly discovered a harrowing scene. The body of 69-year-old Susan Shukron lay in her driveway, fatally struck by the blast of a shotgun. She was described as a true activist who cared deeply about humanity and had been happily married to her husband, Charles, for 34 years when she died. Next door, police discovered Anna, who had made the 911 call, along with her husband, 80-year-old George. The elderly couple, who'd been married for 47 years, had been severely beaten and lay in the basement of their home, barely clinging to life. George and Anna were rushed to hospital, but tragically, their injuries would ultimately prove fatal. Their joint obituary describes them as vibrant, young at heart, and dedicated to their family. Strongly involved in a network of friends and community, it says, they brought beauty into everything. As officers continued their house-to-house search, they found that the horror didn't end there. A few doors down from the Taylors, 88-year-old Laureen Hurst and her 63-year-old son Daryl lay dead outside, where it's thought that they were returning from a trip to the store. Like Susan Shukron, they had been killed with a shotgun. Daryl had been married for 40 years and had 2 children and 2 grandchildren. His wife, Kathy Hurst, told KMBC TV, "They came into this world together and they left together. Here 1 minute and gone the next." Police made their way around the neighbourhood, trying to piece together what had happened. Witnesses said that they heard several shotgun noises coming from the Taylors' home and looked outside the window to see what looked like the Taylors' Toyota Highlander driving down the street. Whoever was driving the car stopped in front of Susan's house, where they got out and delivered the fatal shot to the unsuspecting woman. With that, the car sped away, leaving a trail of destruction behind it. A few hours later, police were called to a motel where 3 people had been attacked at random. 2 of the victims had been followed back to their room by a man who asked them for cigarettes. Once inside, he shut the door, where he began his violent attack. They managed to get out of the room where the man followed, punching the 3rd victim in the face as she walked by. He carried on his attack against one of the first victims in the parking lot, before jumping a fence and fleeing on foot. Eventually, just before midnight, the police discovered the mystery attacker when they received a complaint of a man acting suspiciously. There was Brandon Howell, gripping his right trouser leg where he concealed a 12-gauge shotgun. The gun was loaded with 4 shells, with another 2 spent shells sat in his pocket. Also in his pocket were the keys to a car, George and Anna Taylor's Toyota Highlander. It is thought that Howell had entered the Taylors' home with the intention of stealing their classic Jaguar, beating the elderly couple so he could do so undisturbed. He attempted to hotwire the car, but wasn't able to start it, and so turned his attentions to their Toyota instead. Realising that Susan, Laureen and Daryl had noticed the commotion, Howell shot them dead. 5 people murdered in cold blood, all for the sake of a classic car. The prosecutor's office announced that they'd be seeking the death penalty in the quintuple murder case and set an initial trial date for September 25th, 2017. But Howell was being represented by a public defender who could only take so many death penalty cases a year. Because of this, the trial was delayed several times to avoid violating his constitutional rights. But finally, the trial began in April of 2019. After a 4.5-year wait, It took less than 2 hours of deliberations for a jury to find Brandon Howell guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder. Jean Peters Baker, the Jackson County prosecutor, addressed the press outside the courtroom.
I met these families, some of them all those years ago at the other side of the yellow tape, and some the next morning, and some within a week, after the Taylors were removed from life support and succumbed to their injuries. So, it's been a long road with them, and they, I guess the thought was just how much damage one person could do to so many people. So I'm just really struck by these behind the doors here is a sizable group of people with broken hearts, but at least they know justice is there for them.
Howell was sentenced the following month and received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In the case of Nick and Tabitha, justice may not have been done. But despite the uncertainty, there's one thing we know. Brandon B. Howell won't be hurting anyone else again. Thank you for listening to episode 21 of the Case Remains podcast. As always, if you'd like to keep in touch, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle Case Remains, or you can head over to our website, www.caseremains.com, where you'll find write-ups on missing persons cases and unsolved mysteries. Until next time, stay safe.